So I've been playing Resident Evil Outbreak. Remember that whole internet craze from the early 2000s? Yeah, me neither, but Capcom does, cause they're a bunch of massive lamoids. They actually turned one of their flagship franchises, Resident Evil, into an online game. That's so not cool. They should have turned it into a fax-text adventure. Imagine how scary entering the survival horror would be if all you had was text. That would have been rad as all heck. Anyway, that was it for today's episode of Game Nami, your #1 source for Neo-Japanese games. Now, the story of Resident Evil Outbreak takes place during the Raccoon City zombie extravaganza. You know, the events of RE2 and 3. But instead of starring the usual G.I. Joe antics of Chris and Jill, or the will they bang antics of Claire, Leon, and Ada, you play as a bunch of boring, normal people. These normies are hanging around in a bar doing their thing, being completely unaware of the chaos taking place outside. Until, all of a sudden, a particularly rude customer shows up. And so, these completely boring, unremarkable individuals have to escape the dreaded Raccoon City outbreak. Now, as far as Resident Evil plotlines go, this one is probably the worst, as the voice acting and writing are really awful. It is kind of funny sometimes, as some people get introduced but die seconds later, and the game still treats it like something horrible is happening. But the voice acting and writing are just completely devoid of any kind of effort or quality, so it creates this weird kind of dissonance. That dissonance is awkward, and awkward can be funny, which in this case it is more often than not. But it's still nothing that's really quote-worthy or anything, especially since the characters aren't really, well, characters. So none of them really have any quirky personalities or stupid one-liners as Resi characters usually tend to do. But I feel like the story wasn't really this game's focus anyway. Thing is that, as my dumb stupid intro may have already told you, this game was supposed to be an online co-op survivally escapey kind of thing. But the servers have been shut down as of December 2007. Luckily, the game is mostly playable on your own, as it still functions as a fairly traditional survival horror game. Well, at its core anyway, as unlike all other Resi games released up to that point, the game is actually segmented into 5 different scenarios, all of which present you with a number of problems and obstacles you need to solve in order to escape. So basically, each scenario is its own self-contained little box of puzzles. The interesting thing about this, though, is that each scenario utilizes a slightly different style of survival horror. Like, the first one is just generic zombie outbreak shooty shoot. The second one takes place in this frozen research facility which focuses mostly on puzzles and has very little combat. And the third scenario takes place in a hospital with this unkillable nemesis-style monster crawling through the vents that can jump out at any time. It's kind of like an amalgamation of all Resident Evil games up to that point, which is pretty cool. However, because of the online functionality shitting itself, the game has become largely dependent on AI. So, where you used to be able to work together with other human beings that would try to solve puzzles and defend themselves properly, you are now stuck with a bunch of brain-dead morons that couldn't use a key to open a door if their fucking life depended on it. As I said, the game features a large group of seemingly random individuals, all of which have their own unique abilities like being stronger, having more inventory slots, or just being the master of unlocking. And at the start of each scenario, you get to pick one of these characters, meaning that you can't switch between them while playing, which basically would have solved every issue that I have with this. Thing is that all of the AI-controlled people basically have the ability to do anything a player-controlled character could do. So they can pick up items, push blocks, harvest ammo and healing items, and basically, if you played RE5 on your own, you may already know where this is going. Yeah, this is a Resident Evil game that you play with an army of key-hogging, ammo-wasting, frequently dying Shevas. Fuck. Now, I will admit that this makes it sound a lot worse than it actually is. Yes, the AI is pretty terrible, but overall it only boiled down to a handful of moments where it really became a problem. Though one could definitely argue that a handful is already too much. Which it may very well be, but it honestly didn't bother me as much as it potentially could have. Although, there was that one time where I was stuck looking for a gold key only to find out Officer Dick Cheese had it in his inventory for God knows how fucking long. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate the effort, man, but you could have at least told me or something, or you know, actually fucking use it to solve the puzzle. And those moments really do suck. But for now, let's talk about some of the cool shit that this game does. One thing that I really liked was how everything happened in real time. From reading notes to managing your inventory, you're never safe from being assaulted and the panic is most certainly there. Even things like trading items with your teammates happens in real time. So it's not just taking place in an isolated menu, which is pretty cool. In fact, the whole scenario thing is a pretty great idea overall. I mean, it isn't scary, but it really emphasizes the arcadey speedrunners mentality fans of the Resident Evil series tend to have. Things like your inventory don't carry over between scenarios, it gives you scores, and it keeps track of all sorts of different variables. The only thing that kinda shits on this idea is that replaying a scenario doesn't really seem to change anything. Like, I was kinda hoping that you'd have vastly different ways to tackle each situation, or that playing as a different character would have shit play out differently. But no, replaying is mostly for unlocking costumes and trying to get a faster time. Which is alright, I guess, but I was just kinda hoping for a bit more. Anyway, while the game definitely has some cool ideas, it's also very flawed in a number of ways. First thing that I noticed was how incredibly awful the controls are, both when actually playing and while navigating your inventory. I mean, besides the less than traditional layout, the game also has some of the worst tank controls I have ever seen. And this is coming from someone who has defended tank controls in many of my videos. Thing is though, is that the turning arc is ridiculously slow, and considering the game's higher focus on action, this is kind of terrible. Luckily, depending on your definition of luck, the game lets you walk normally with the analog stick. Only problem with this is that the analog inputs are really slow to respond when it comes to changing camera angles. And there are a lot of changing camera angles. So quite often I ended up running into zombies even though it wasn't really my fault at all, which is pretty bad. Nothing that really kills the game, mind you, but considering how many games like this Capcom has under their belt, you'd think that they'd be able to do this just fine. And the second thing what I noticed that really ends up bringing the game down a great deal is the before mentioned AI. Now, during most of the game they tend to misbehave or ignore you, but overall it's not such an incredibly big deal. During the boss battles, however, it certainly fucking is. Thing is that the game depends on teamwork, as do the boss battles. But during the first boss, I had no team at all. All I had was one poisoned dude with a broken pipe, and some asshole who decided to pick up 2 shotguns but refused to pick up any ammo. So I had to wait for the dude with the shotguns to die to be able to take one from him as he wouldn't stand the fuck still, and then kill the boss all by myself. This, paired with the rather intuitive menus and the kinda horrible controls, made for one of the most frustrating boss experiences I ever had. Sure, I still killed the damn thing after putting the scenario on easy, but on anything harder than that, they really seem to have meant for you to play this online. And yeah, I get that that's what the game was made for in the first place, but I still feel that the AI is inexcusably shitty. They get lost, they get hurt all the time, they never do what you want them to do, they open and close doors at random, and holy shit, this is actually like playing with real strangers online, isn't it? Fuck. Anyway, as far as Resident Evil goes, this one is pretty mediocre. It's not really bad, and it has some pretty cool ideas even though they don't necessarily work out all that well in practice. But the game just feels a bit, I don't know, unmemorable maybe? Like, there's no real characters or big epic moments or extremely funny cutscenes. It's a fun Resident Evil game still, but compared to any of the previous offerings, it completely pales in comparison. That said though, I would have loved to see this expanded upon. I mean, it is kind of like mercenary mode with puzzles, which is a pretty cool idea if you ask me. I mean, I would have loved to get to know all of the deep, intricate lore involving the game's main villain called... Oh wait, there is no main villain. Right up in your butt, dick.